Hi guys, Grand J here and welcome to another one of our videos. Opus 7 is officially out and you know what that means, it's time for another set review. So today's video will be talking about the new fire cards of Opus 7.
So the first card to look at is Auron. He's a 4 CP 8k. His ability is Category X forward to control game Brave, Dull, choose one blocking forward against plus 1000 power until the end of turn. So the most important part about this card is his job, which is Guardian, which has synergy with Kamari, in that it gets benefits from you having more Guardians on the field. That being said, I don't think this card is particularly good. His best analogy or his best comparison is Cyan from a couple of sets back that gives all your Final Fantasy 6 characters Brave. So it's got a very similar ability to that. That being said, I don't think this card is particularly good. He does happen to be in the right elements that you need to play Guardians, which happens to be Fire and Water. He's on curve, his ability is a little bit lackluster, but ultimately, I don't think this card is a terrible card, but he's not a fantastic card either. The fact that he can give you a Tidus's Brave is pretty good, especially if you're playing any of the old Tiduses, especially like the Blitz Ace Tidus, where you can have a really big forward on the field that might be 9k or 10k, being able to swing out with him with Brave, and also have him on defense is pretty good as well. So this card isn't particularly good. If you ever played him, it's specifically for his job. I think in the Guardians deck, which I think a lot of people are underrating, it's going to be at least tier 1.5, I reckon. So it's going to be a very solid deck, and this card is going to be a reasonable contributing factor to it. That being said, I don't think that this card is a great card. You're only going to put him in there specifically for Guardian, maybe as a 12, just as a random situation where you might want to play him down. Next is Aegis. He's a 4 CP 8k again, and this time he's a Warrior of Light job. And his job is, or his effect is, Warrior Light forward to control other than Aegis, gain Brave, and when Aegis enters the field, you may play one forward of cost 2 from your hand onto the field. So do note that he doesn't say play a forward of cost 2 or less, so it's specifically just cost 2 from your hand onto the field. So when you take that into consideration, he's actually pretty good value in that he's a 4 CP 8k that also puts 2 CP worth of value onto the field. His ability of giving all your Warrior Lights, or your job Warrior Lights, Brave is actually pretty good, considering that there's a lot of cards or a lot of forwards from the set that happen to be Warrior Light as well, and that's definitely a archetype that they're pushing in this set. So yeah, so I think his ability is pretty strong. He's a pretty solid forward, and the fact that he gets a combo with Soul is actually pretty good. He also combos well with the new Warrior Light from the starter deck as well. So this card's actually pretty solid, and the fact that he doesn't sort of limit the card that he brings out to specifically a fire forward of cost 2 means that he does have playability if you want to play a Druid Color Warrior Light deck as well. Not that I think that there are any good 2-cost job Warrior of Light targets in other elements right now, so that is a bit of a challenge. But if you want to play more of a swarmy aggressive deck, especially if you're playing the 2-cost Fire Warrior of Light from the new starter deck, where you're just spamming out dudes that don't need to be job Warrior of Light, then this card does technically get a fair bit stronger as well. So this card, I think, is more of a build-around card, and Fire, I think, is sort of started defining its archetype as being a deck that can play out more cheap forwards and send them in. So when you take that in consideration, this might be a card that's pushing Fire in a particularly new archetype, and I think it might be quite an effective card for that. So I don't think this card is going to be the most competitive level play, but I think that it's a solid card, and if you can find the right 2-cost forwards that you want to pair up with it, it's going to be pretty strong. Next is Red Mage. So this is one of the standard units from a whole bunch of standard units in the set, where if you pay their CP cost with a secondary element, then they get a secondary ability, or they get an ability, right? So this Red Mage is 2 CP 4k. When Red Mage enters field, if the cost paid to play Red Mage included Ice CP, your opponent discards one card from his or her hand. So that's a pretty solid ability, and his second ability is Dull. Choose one forward, deal it 10,000 or deal it 1,000 damage. So this card's actually not too bad. So when you consider it's kind of on par with Thaumaturge and Argath, although the downside of it is that you have to play it with effectively 1 fire and 1 ice backup, in that you can't split up the CP that you're paying for this card. So you can't discard like a fire card to trigger off the ice ability, and similarly, if you discard ice card, you're not going to be able to meet the fire element requirement to play this card. So it is a slower card, but it's still equally as valuable as the other discard effects. Although it doesn't get the same bonus that Thaumaturge gets when it gets an extra plus 4,000 power when your opponent has 2 or less cards in their hand. So do take that into consideration. So I think that this card is reasonable, although I think it's a little bit slow. As a value card, it's actually pretty legit. And when you consider that Fire is now pushing all these sort of weenie forwards into their archetype, it's actually not bad as just a sort of tempo play and a value play. You just play it with a Fire and Ice backup, you're discarding card from your opponent's hand, and then you just attack with him on the following turns. If your opponent tries to block, you've got plenty of small, like effectively free ping type effects that can help your red mage trade up into larger forwards in combat. So I think that this card is pretty solid, especially if you're playing like a Fire Ice sort of weenie aggro deck. I think that this card will fit into that quite well amongst like all the other weenies, such as like Argas, such as Thermatosh, that are going to inherently take cards from your opponent's hand and then subsequently trade into some sort of forward. So the next card we're going to be looking at is Frit. It's a 2 CP forward that's 4,000 power. It's got a special ability of Frit is also a monster in all situations. So this is one of the few situations where we have a card that has a secondary card type, and it's got this card type in all situations, which does include the break zone as well as in your deck. So any effect that can search or revive a monster card from your break zone or from your deck will be able to search Frit out as well. Its ability is when Frit is sent from the field into a break zone, you may search for a card named Ifrit and add it to your hand. So there are 3 monster forward hybrids in this set that happen to have the same effect. So Frit in this case searches for Ifrit, which definitely seems to be the weakest amongst the 3, in the form of Babblives, which searches for Shiva, and Zapped, which searches for Ramu. Ifrit seems to be the weakest summon amongst these set, and yeah, doesn't have as good as many targets, and the Ifrit from this set doesn't really help out that much either. That being said, though, it is effectively a 0 CP monster or 0 CP forward, because you are eventually claiming a card back when this is sent from the field to break zone. So even if you treat it as just a meat shield, this effectively is 0 CP meat shield. So it's actually not too bad when you take that in consideration. And also the fact that Rain, the searcher for monsters or WAF monsters, is also in Fire as well. So that's pretty good, which is the same color. That being said, though, I'm still not a super fan of these forward/monster hybrids unless you're building a deck specifically that interacts with them. And it seems like the elements that really want to support monsters, which is mainly water, although ice to a certain degree, doesn't really support Frit. And because of that, I don't think that it's going to see too much competitive play. And the fact that it's Wolf doesn't really help out enough to really sort of justify this card. So I don't think that this card is going to see all too much play. Even in casual play, I think that there are better options. So the next card to look at is Ifrit. It's a 4 CP summon, EX Burst, choose 1 forward, deal 7,000 damage. If Ifrit results from an EX Burst, deal 8,000 damage instead. So this card is actually pretty underwhelming. The best part about this card is, well, I suppose the best part about this card is EX Burst. The second best part about this is Ifrit, because it does make it searchable with Frit. That being said, though, this card inherently doesn't want you to play from your hand. You want to play this card as an EX Burst to get its bonus effect. So you're effectively paying an extra 1 CP to get the potential for 8,000 damage off an EX Burst. Because if you weren't relying on that EX Burst dealing 8,000 damage, you just play Brynhilde. It's better in every single case, right? So Brynhilde is a free CP that does 7k. So when you're playing it from your hand, you're paying 1 CP more than Brynhilde would, for the off chance that Ifrit will do an extra 1k off an EX Burst. So because of that, I don't think, like, personally, I'm not of the opinion that sort of justifies playing this Ifrit card over Brynhilde. And yeah, while hitting AK is very relevant, a lot of fire decks, they are playing Seytuna, which does increase the damage of all your fire summons by 1,000, which does mean your Brynhildes can hit for AK, which obviously pushes Ifrit up from AK to 9k in a EX Burst situation. That being said, though, I don't think it's worth playing Ifrit. It kind of sucks how in this set, every element has only got 1 summon this set, whereas usually they get 2 summons, and they all seem to be pretty lackluster. And I think this one is pretty lackluster as well. Paying 4 CP to only deal 7k is actually pretty weak, especially considering that there has been a slight degree of power creep, especially with summons. I think that this summon's kind of gone in the opposite direction, has become weaker in my opinion. So the next card to look at is Varuna. It's a 2 CP monster, and it's part of this new, like, trigger or, like, transform on trigger type monster. So its effect is when a forward you control deals damage to your opponent, Varuna also becomes a forward with 8,000 power and brave. This effect does not end at the end of the turn. This ability will not trigger Varuna's forward. So effectively, it's a monster that you put down that effectively doesn't do anything until its trigger occurs, in which case it becomes a forward. So having a 2 CP Brave 8k is actually very, very solid. I think that's a very good stat line, very good body, and having a forward deal damage to your opponent is not too hard to do, especially in fire, because it is generally a more aggressive element. Triggering this off is pretty easy. That being said, though, it is a 2 CP monster, which kind of holds it back because a lot of monster removal type effects are currently removing like a threshold of 2 CP monsters and below, which means that Varuna is able to be destroyed by those things, such as Ramu. And so, yeah, because of that, I think like its cost is both its pro and its con. Its con is that it's easily removable as a monster, and its pro is that it's a 2 CP monster that turns into an AK with Brave, which is very, very solid stats. So, yeah. I don't know where to put this right now, but I don't think that there's enough reason to play this card. Like, there's not enough incentive to play this card. There's not that much support in Fire to really sort of push monsters out. And so, whilst this is definitely one of the better monsters of this trigger, I don't think that Fire needs this card. It's not what Fire needs at this moment in order to push itself towards more competitive play. The next card is Black Mage. So Black Mage, this is effectively just a reprint from Opus 1. It's a 2 CP backup, fire a doll, put Black Mage in the break zone, choose one forward, deal it 4,000 damage. So it's a standard unit, it's a 2 CP backup that you can put into play early, and later on you can just blow up to deal 4,000 damage. I don't think that this is particularly cost effective, and there's a reason why it hasn't seen any sort of competitive play for quite some time, is because it is a little bit too expensive, and 4,000 damage is just not enough anymore, especially considering how all the 2 CP backups have just power crept to a point where you can have like a very like quality set of backup line, and you don't consider using Black Mage at all. So because of that, this card isn't really that playable. So the benefit of this card is that it just happens to be Category 5, which means certain cards that are supporting Category 5 in the form of Faris and in the form of Bart will synergize with this card. But other than that, you're really, really grasping at straws if you really want to play this card. Generally, there are better ways to deal damage to your opponent's forwards in the form of breakable backups, and this is probably not one of them. So the next card to look at is Saz. It's a 4 CP backup EX Burst. When Saz enters the field, you may search for one fire summon and add it to your hand. So this is like pretty standard for a 4 CP backup. You're getting a 2 CP backup. Effectively, it's a 2 CP backup that searches you for a card. Generally, it's not as it's efficient as one of those free CP backups that can search for a particular card. In this case, it does search for a fire summon, which is generally pretty good. Fire summons happen to be quite strong, and you got a lot of very playable options as well. So it's actually pretty good in that regard. And EX Burst is just kind of a little bonus on top, which sort of justifies the fact that it is a 4 CP backup as opposed to being a free CP backup. So yeah, I think this card is very solid, and running like a 1-off or 2-off in a fire deck, especially to search out for the particular fire summon that you need, especially if you're playing like utility summons such as Phoenix, this is a pretty good card for that as well. So yeah, I think this card is solid, and I think like whilst Mono Fire is one of those elements that people are like sort of crapping on, saying it's a worse element, I think that Mono Fire is actually quite playable, and I think that this is a very solid card for that archetype. Next is Samurai. It's a 2 CP backup. When Samurai enters the field, choose one fire forward against plus 2,000 power and brave until the end of turn. And then it's got a secondary ability of Dull. Put Samurai into break zone. Choose one fire forward against plus 2,000 power and brave until the end of turn. You can only use this ability if you have received 5 points of damage or more. So I like this backup. So as just like a straight 2 CP backup, you're getting a ton of value. Plus 2,000 power and brave means that your small forwards are going to trade up into larger forwards, or your large forwards just basically get to go in for free damage. And its second ability is just like being able to break itself to like repeat the effect again is very good as well. Even though you do have to have the caveat of receiving 5 points damage or more, which like real talk, in that situation it's pretty good. And if you're in a situation where you just need to break this back up, but you're not at that high damage threshold, you probably don't really need this card anyway. So yeah, I think that this is a backup that's very, very solid. It does have to draw back out if it can only choosing fire forwards, which means that even if you are playing a mono fire deck, it can't choose your light or dark forward, which kind of sucks. But all things considered, this is just so much value. You can just play it when you have a forward on the field, and you're getting to swing a guy in. And then at some point, you get to repeat this effect, break the backup, and then play another backup as well. So this is very good, very solid card. And I think definitely in terms of fire backups, this is like one of those cards that we should start experimenting more with. On to the first legendary of the set. Here we have Jekt. It's a 5 CP 9,000 power forward. It's Final Fantasy X and its job is Guardian. If you have received 4 points of damage or more, the cost of playing Jekt on the field is reduced by 4. When Jekt enters the field, if you have at least 2 points of damage more than your opponent, Jekt deals your opponent 1 point of damage. So this is a pretty strong, fantastic card. I like this card a lot. That being said, though, you kind of have to put yourself in a very specific position in order to make the most of this card. The fact that, yeah, if you have 4 points of damage or more, this card becomes a 1 CP 9k is, like, very, very good, right? And then, like, the caveat of, like, if your opponent has 2 or less damage than you, or you have 2 or more damage than your opponent, you get to deal 1 damage to your opponent. So if you're in a situation where you'll say 4 damage to your opponent's 2 damage, you just get to deal 3 damage, and you get to have 1 CP 9k on the field. So these conditions, if you meet them, it's just so much value, right? So it's so much value, and this card just gets like stronger in a situation where, say, like you're in a 5 or 6 life situation, your opponent's at like 3 or 4 life situation. You play it and you just deal your opponent damage, right? You can easily push it from a very close game of like 5 damage and 3 damage to like 5 damage and 4 damage, and get a dude on board for 1 fire CP. So yeah, it's a very powerful card. Although you do want to play it into a situation where you are receiving a lot more damage, or if you want to play a slow deck where you happen to get more damage leaked through to you. So the immediate idea that comes to mind is something like Fusoya, where you can trade your life to deal damage to your opponent's forwards, and then like eventually at some point you can then capitalize on it by being at higher damage, putting Jack down really cheaply, dealing your opponent 1 damage to catch up, as well as just having a big body on board. So I think that this card is very, very solid. It's a lot of value, but it is a build-around card, so you do have to build around it with something like Fusoya or any other way to deal damage to yourselves. But this is a very strong card, and it happens to be Guardian as well, which does mean it does synergize with the Kamari strategy. So yeah, it being fire as well does sort of build into that fire water Guardians deck. And yeah, as just 1 CP forward and like a big body, I think that this is a very good complement as just like a fire Fusoya deck. Or if you want to build the Guardians deck, I think this is a great addition to that as well. Next, we have Summoner. It's a free CP 7k forward. When Summoner enters the field, choose 1 forward and opponent controls. If the cost paid to play Summoner includes Lightning, dull it. So I am of the opinion that most of these like pay a secondary element standard units are pretty weak. Just basically because they straight up don't get their ability if you have some sort of way to cheat them in or to put them into play for free. And then they just become vanilla bodies, right? So in this case, you're paying like 1 lightning to dull one of your opponent's forwards when this comes into play, and otherwise it's just a free CP7k, right? So I don't think that this is a particularly good card. There's like, if you have the lightning CP available, then you have a ton of lightning cards that can just dull your opponent's stuff, and they're going to have either bigger bodies or they're going to have much more impactful effects when they enter play, rather than Summoner, and they're not going to have the caveat of you not being able to trigger their abilities if you don't have the lightning CP or if you put these guys into play for free. So I don't think that this is particularly good. I would not play it, even if I was playing Fire or Lightning. I would play other forwards that have similar sort of effects. And the thing is that Fire has like great cards such as Phoenix that can bring free CP forwards from your break zone onto the field, and they will not trigger if you play a card like Summoner onto the field. Even though you spent Lightning CP to play the Phoenix, you're not spending the Lightning CP to play the Summoner. So in that regard, I don't think this card is very good. I virtually wouldn't play him at all. So next we have Soul. It's a 2 CP 5000 power forward. If you control a job Warrior of Light forward other than Soul, Soul gains plus 2000 power and haste. So this is a card that we were talking about before with Aegis. So he is exactly the right body size for Aegis to play out for free, and he happens to get a whole lot of bonuses out. So not only does Aegis give him Brave, but if you control another job Warrior of Light, which Aegis is, or if you control just like any other Warrior of Light, and there's a ton this set, as well as the good ones from previous sets, or just like classic good old Light Warrior of Light, he does get plus 2000 power and haste. So 7 CP, or like 7k for 2 CP and haste, like on a baseline, is just very solid, right? And then he just gets a bonus of any other Warrior Lights that happen to be on the field at the time to give him any additional buffs. So even if you just play him normally, it's actually very good. Just like a 2 CP haste guy when you have another Warrior Light on the field. I think this is very solid, and definitely like it's one of those cards I want to start like trialing more with like the Warrior Lights build, whether it's going to be mono fire or whether it's going to be like fire and a secondary color. It's definitely a strategy I want to try. And yeah, this does synergize with like the 4-cost Phoenix that allows you to play a 2 CP forward from your break zone onto the field. You can just play, you can deal some damage, play Soul onto the field, and then swing out with a 7k. It's really, really good value. And so, this card will see play, and especially any sort of deck that's going to play Aegis, you're always going to play, like, triple Soul as well. Next card is Berserker. It's a 2 CP 8000 power forward, so it is super above the curve, but when Berserker deals damage to your opponent or to a forward, break Berserker. And this is where we realize this card is bad. So, yes, it can deal 8000 damage to a forward in combat, but then it breaks itself, which kind of sucks. Obviously, there are ways to prevent this. If you play something like Paravir, or if you play something like Sabin, you can make it so that he doesn't break due to his own abilities. That's such a play around to make, it's such a play around to make this guy not break from its own ability, right? And yeah, it's great that it's a 2 CP AK. So if you just treat it as like a 2 CP ability that's eventually going to deal 8k to a forward, it's actually pretty good value in that regard. But you need a whole lot of things to line up. And if you are like attacking with this, your opponent gets to choose what they block. So like if your opponent is blocking with just like a Viking or something, Berserk is just completely like irrelevant. It's been completely wasted. So in that regard, this card, it's bad unless you play with something like Paravir or Sabin, where it becomes slightly less bad, but still pretty bad. It seems like a fun card. Maybe it's worth experimenting with Sabin or Paravir. But that being said, though, like you are going for some quality memes if you're playing this card. Next is Balgalvin. It's a 5 CP forward at 8,000 power, so it's a little bit below the curve. So this is one of the 4 generals from the FFL game. Final Fantasy Legends game, and they all have a similar effect of if all the CP that you use to play this card is of their CP, then they get a bonus effect. So in this case, when Balgalvin enters the field, choose on forward and opponent controls. If the cost to play Balgalvin was only paid with fire CP, deal it 7,000 damage. Its secondary ability of S Fire Dull, choose one forward of any element except for fire, deal it 10,000 damage. So this card, I think it's kind of underwhelming, right? Like, yes, you're paying, like even if you play it in a mono fire deck, dealing only 7,000 damage on entry is kind of weak. Like, I would have expected for a 5 CP forward at 8k power to deal, like, 8,000 damage, right? 7,000 damage is, like, fine. It deals with a lot of free CP 7ks. And now in the game, like, a lot of 2 CP 7ks. But, I would have liked it to hit that 8k mark. Especially if its body is a little bit below curve and it has effectively no ongoing ability. This card is effectively a blank card if you're playing it in a like multicolor deck and you don't hit the like all fire like requirement to trigger off its ability. This card's a little bit underwhelming, and dealing 7k is so easy in fire. It's so easy in fire. So I'm like not like I generally don't think that this card is particularly good. Although a reason can be said for a card to deal 7,000 damage. It is like still a reasonable amount, and it just allows your small forwards to trade up into larger forwards and to threaten. So it has a usable effect, so it's playable, but I think that there are better options for a card in this slot. Its second ability of Final Backdraft, because there's only one Balgalvin, you're not going to be able to trigger off this S ability too often, and it's not a particularly cheap cost. S Fire Dull means it's a little bit cumbersome in that you need Balgalvin to stay alive, and you're also paying 2 fire and discarding card at the same time. Dealing 10,000 damage is pretty good in that you're killing the guy, but obviously you have to choose a forward, and it could be any element except fire. So there's been some debate recently in regards to can this hit Yuri, and I'm pretty confidently going to say that it can't hit Yuri because Yuri is a fire card. Although like I know that there is a explanation of the logic of English that can explain that this card can select Yuri, but I'm pretty sure that it can't select Yuri, and that logic is only because that this game is like not translated in the best way from Japanese to English. So if this could hit Yuri, then I'd be a little bit more confident to play it in the current metagame, but I'm pretty sure that Yuri is just going to be like a super like common card, or like it's a card that you're going to see a lot in the current metagame, and because of that, Balgalvin, I don't think his S ability is too relevant, and yeah, I think that this card is a little bit underwhelming overall. Next is Fang. It's a free CP forward 7k. It's from Final Fantasy 13, and it's got a really cool ability. This is the sort of ability that I just love, right? So if you control 2 or more Category 13 characters, Fang gets First Strike. If you control 4 or more Category 13 characters, Fang gets Haste. If you control 6 or more Category 13 characters, Fang gets plus 3,000 power. So, first of all, we do have to say, it does say control 2 or, like, control X or more. It doesn't say X or more other characters, right? So Fang does count itself. So if you do sort of do the maths, it's like, if you control another 13 character, Fang gets First Strike. If you control 3 other characters that are 13, gets Haste. And then if you control 5 others, gets plus 3,000 power as well, right? So when you take that into consideration, it's actually pretty easy, right? So it's taking into consideration of characters, not forwards, not just forwards. So like characters are like your forwards, your backups, and now your monsters as well, right? So it's pretty easy to get up to like at least the minimum threshold of having 3 other 13 characters on the field, especially if you build sort of in that direction. Yeah, which gives it 7k first strike haste for free CP, which is actually very solid in my opinion. Even that being said, though, you're probably going to play it like Duo Color just so you have like more quality 13 targets. But like in the situation where you are, you're probably going to play it Fire and Ice. Although potentially you probably could play it in Fire Lightning as well. Although definitely I'm pretty sure that you want to play it Fire Ice. In the Fire Ice build, yeah, this card is almost always just going to be like free CP first strike haste, right? Which means that if it outfights all other 7Ks and it's just like a haste dude, right? And then if you just happen to have like all 13 backups, or if you happen to have like 3 or 4 13 backups and you have like one like monster and like another dude on field, Fang becomes a 10k first strike haste, right? So it's coming in and basically killing your dude every time it attacks, or it's going to be like swinging in for damage. So this is a card that's not cumbersome. It's not like under costed, even if you don't hit like the super high like thresholds of it. Even at just like one other guy, first strike, free CP 7k, it's fine, right? But then like as soon as you add like 2 more guys, it gets haste as well. And then it becomes good, right? And then you like add more dudes, it becomes like fantastic, right? And it happens to be in Fire, which has all these like cool revival effects, such as like Big Phoenix, right? So yeah, you can bring back Fang. So yeah, great card. I like this card. Like probably not consistent enough to be in the like most top tier echelons of competitive play, but this card is definitely like a very good card. Like you take this card into a like a weekly locals, and I'm pretty sure you can definitely like win with it. Like I'm pretty sure like Fire Ice 13 with Fang and like cards like Sarah is going to be very, very solid in my opinion. So yeah, like I would recommend trying this card out as a deck build around. Next card is Bomb. It's a 2 CP monster, and this is a part of the cycle of monsters that you can be discarded from your hand to use a free effect. So it's a 2 CP monster. Its effect once on the field, put Bomb into the break zone, choose one forward, deal it 3,000 damage, and deal 2,000 damage to all forwards your opponent controls. So effectively, you're shooting one guy for 5k, and you're shooting everything else for 2k. And its secondary ability of discard Bomb, choose one forward, deal 2,000 damage. You can only use this ability if Bomb is in your hand. So this card is pretty scary in my opinion, in the sense that if you have this, effectively at any point you can just thread to like deal 2,000 damage to kill like a 2,000 power 4, which in most cases is pretty irrelevant, except in the situation of Fermenters or in the situation of, say, Vikings, right? You can just kill a small guy by discarding it. But it just allows all your small guys to trade up, right? And then, like, in Fire, because there's, like, quite a reasonable amount of Fire forwards that happen to have first strike as well, it just, like, makes them even more threatening, right? So yeah, like in the situation before, if you have Fang and first strike, you can just pitch a bomb, deal 2,000 damage to your opponent's forward, and all of a sudden your first strike forward just like runs over them, right? And here's the thing, you don't even need like to play Fire to use this card. Like all these discard effects don't require like any like elemental CP to play at all, which means that if you want to play like a water deck where you just like want to chuck in Bomb for an extra 2,000 damage to help you guys get over combat, or if you want to do it in lightning or water or wind or whatever, you can just play Bomb, right? So just like as a way for your small guys to just trade up into larger guys, it's fantastic. And yeah, it's no color requirement on as well, and it's a monster, and there's a lot of support for monsters right now. It just seems like the last 3 sets there's always been monster support. There hasn't always been support for every other archetype, but there's always been support for monsters. And because of that, yeah, this card is pretty solid. Its first ability is kind of whatever. 5k to a guy for 2 CP is not terrible, and then spreading 2k. It's like, it's spreading damage, but it's like, you're not killing most things, so it's not too helpful there. But yeah, the discard ability is very flexible, very solid. And yeah, if you're just wondering about cards to just chuck into your other element decks, and you're like, oh man, if there's anything that I can do to just like up my combat like power by a little bit, Bomb is a great card to just chuck in. So the next card is Meef. It's a 2 CP backup. When Meef enters the field, you may discard 1 card from your hand. If you do, search for 1 forward of the same cost as the discarded card and add it to your hand. So this is a lot like pretty much any of those 2 CP or 4 CP backups that search your deck for a card when they enter play. Meef just has a slightly different hurdle that you have to jump over in order to make that happen. So in this case, instead of being 4 CP, it happens to be a 2 CP backup where you have to discard a card on resolution of this effect. So this card is like Fire's equivalent of that 4 CP search your deck for a forward of that same element. But in this case, you can search for a forward of any element, although it has to be the same cost as the card that you discarded. So there are some pros and cons to this. So first of all, like Fire's, like you're not locked to having to search for a Fire card. So you can search for any particular card, although the restriction is that you obviously have to discard a card that happens to have the same cost effect, the same cost as the card that you're trying to search for, which can be kind of restricting. That being said, though, unless you're pitching like a very obscure costed card, like say 7 costed Phoenix, or maybe like a 1 costed card, in general, you're going to be able to find find a forward that's relevant. So most of the cards are going to sit in that like 2 to 5 CP range. Although maybe in the 2 CP range, you're not going to see too many quality forwards. Although in Fire, you do happen to have a lot of good quality 2 CP forwards. So even in a situation where you're just pitching a like 2 CP backup, finding a like 2 CP Fire forward is actually not too bad, right? So yeah. In addition to this, like it just discards a card, so you're not paying for a CP. So if you're playing a deck that happens to run more light or dark cards, you're not using them for CP, but you can discard them for this card's effect. So if you happen to play, like as I was talking about before, like the Fosoya deck with the Guardians, or Fosoya deck with Jekt, if you pick up extra copies of it within Fire itself, you are able to get rid of those copies with cards like me for you, discarding them to search for other cards from your deck. So it provides a pretty good utility in that regard. And being able to search for any forward of the same cost, like, really opens up the potential of what you're searching for. So this card is pretty solid. Definitely it's like, its uses are not super apparently clear right now. But yeah, I think some stage in the near future, as like people start tinkering more and more, we're going to find some quality targets to play this card with. And I think that, yeah, this card's going to be a very solid card to those decks. So next we have the second legendary of the set. It is Lan. It is a 4 CP AK 4 that's exactly on curve, but if you can control a card named Rain, Lan gets plus 1000 power. When Lan deals damage to your opponent or to a forward, choose one forward. You may pay fire 1. If you do so, deal a damage equal to Lan's power. So this card is actually really, really, really good. So first of all, yeah, if you just happen to have Rain on your field, whether it's in the forward or as a backup, which if you're playing this land, you're probably going to play Rain as a backup. Yeah, it just becomes a 4 CP 9k, which by itself, pretty solid, right? But if you happen to if it deals damage to your opponent or deals damage to a forward in combat, right? And like Land's always going to do one of the two pretty quickly, right? Either your opponent blocks it, in which case you're dealing damage to a forward, or Land blocks a dude, or if you're like attacking through, you're going to hit something, right? Which means that you can just trigger it off and just pay effectively 4 CP to like deal 8k or 9k to another one of your opponent's dudes, right? So that's so much good value, just blowing dudes up for a very nominal cost. Yeah. Also, in addition, like a recent ruling on this card says that you only pay this cost on resolution of this ability, right? So only when this card successfully is resolving, that's when you pay for the 4 CP. You don't pay for it on trigger, which means that if your opponent does anything in response or the target's lost or whatever, then you don't have to pay this 4 CP. In addition to this, right? When you pay for the 4 CP and you deal damage to one of your opponent's forwards, like equal to Land's power, that triggers off his ability again, right? So you can just pay another 4 CP to like shoot another guy for 8 or 9k, right? So you as long as you have CP, you can just keep chaining these off and keep blowing dudes up, right? So like against a board of like mid-range like 8k 9ks, Land is so stupidly good. You're just going to constantly blow dudes up and up and up and up. Obviously Land has to survive that first combat in order for this to trigger. So yeah, so if like Land instantly dies from combat, yeah, you will get one trigger. I'm pretty sure you'll get one trigger. So if you if he enters combat and he deals damage to a guy, he will get one trigger. But then obviously you can't trigger multiple times. So if Land, so let's say your Land is AK and you like attack or block another AK, they'll deal damage to each other. Land is going to die from the end of this combat, but he will get one trigger of deal damage to your opponent. So you'll be able to pay this once to blow up one of your opponent's guys, right? But if Land wins the fight and he survives, he can pay 4 CP, deal 8k to another guy, and then because that triggers off this ability again, he can pay another 4 CP to kill another guy, and then 4 CP to deal another 4k, another 8k damage as well. So, yeah, this card is absolutely fantastic. You do not need to build around this card at all. The only build around, or the only cards that you really need in your deck to really support this card is Rain, which if you're playing Land, you're probably going to play as well because she's a effectively 2 CP backup that has a kind of minor bonus effect as well. Also, she's like EX burst search for Land. So, yeah, very solid card, and like it's just like one of the best legendaries of this set. Fire keeps getting these like really good Fire legendaries, and like people keep saying that Fire is bad. Honestly, it's probably because people just like don't experiment enough with Fire. But this card is so good, so good. Although its cost of paying 3 Fire and one one colorless does mean you're tending to be more of a majority Fire deck. But yeah, it's a very solid card. I don't understand why you wouldn't play it if you're playing Fire. Next, we have Latov. It's a 5 CP backup. When Latov enters the field, choose one card named Chilinka or Yuri in your breaks and play it onto the field. So this card is actually very good value. Like, if you are considering the fact that, like, most backups are just, like, baseline 2 CP backups, right? So you're paying an extra free CP to get a Chilinka or Yuri onto the field, right? So if you consider the fact that just getting a card, like just getting a Chilinka or getting a Yuri, is an extra extra 1 or 2 CP on top. Like, if it was a 3 CP or 4 CP backup that said put Yuri or Chilinka from your break zone back to your hand, that's already pretty good, right? But then paying 5 CP, just 1 extra CP more than the hypothetical situation there, to put a Yuri or Chilinka from your break zone onto the field means that you're getting Chilinka and Yuri at just like such a discount, right? So this card is like really super value to put Yuri or Chilinka onto the field. That being said, Chilinka is a wind card, which means that if you were playing this Chilinka Yuri build, if you're playing it and you're searching for Chilinka, you're probably going to be fire wind in that situation. In which case, Yuri's ability is a little bit more difficult to trigger off. But if you're playing it as just mono fire and just disregard the fact that you can get Chilinka and just use to get Yuri, absolutely fantastic, man. Absolutely fantastic. Super good value to bring back Yuri. Obviously, you can only have one of these guys on the field at a time, so it means that you get to trigger off this ability. But if you are playing mono fire and you are playing Yuri, this card is a fantastic card to chuck in to boost it up. Even though, in my opinion, Yuri, I think, is primarily going to see its home in mono wind with his sister. I assume it's sister, Chilinka. Latov is a very good card if you do want to take Yuri into the fire element. So next we have Lulu. It's a 2 CP backup. When Lulu enters the field, choose one forward. You may put one backup other than Lulu you control into a break zone. If you do, deal it 7,000 damage. So this card is pretty cool. I like this card. Its job is Guardian. So first of all, if you're building Guardian's deck, this is another great card to chuck in. And it does reduce the cost of your Kamaris. And yeah, so its basic ability of just like being a 2 CP backup that can deal 7k at the cost of sacrificing one of your backups is very solid. So if you consider the fact that breaking up one of your backups is a cost, but like at the same time it actually provides pretty solid utility for fire, then it's actually very good, right? On a 2 CP backup, dealing 7k is like very solid. Do note, if you don't have another backup other than Lulu, you can just play Lulu as a 2 CP backup, and Lulu doesn't destroy herself. Obviously, she doesn't get a 7k damage, but if on turn 1, you just need to put a 2 CP backup on the field, you can just play a Lulu. You can literally just play a Lulu. It fizzles, does nothing, but allows you to at least play a 2 CP backup. So do keep that in mind, that it's always guaranteed at least just like a 2 CP backup on turn 1, right? Dealing 7k damage, especially in the early game, is just so good. So many of the like, early game plays are just going to be like 2 CP or like 3 CP 7ks, and you want to like get rid of those things off the board. And Lulu just helps you blow them up. It also clears up your backup line. A lot of the quality fire backups, and fire has so many of these like quality like fire backups that have like really strong interplay abilities, such as Black Waltz, such as Irvine, such as Vivi. There's a lot of these like interplay deal like 6 or 7k type fire type backups, but they're all unique. So after you put them in, you can't play anymore, right? So Lulu is great in that you can play one of those backups like Black Waltz or Irvine, etc. Usually for like free CP, and then later on you can play Lulu, clear them out, and then that gives you the space to play another copy of those as well. And like just talking about Latov like previously, so if you put Latov down, you get a Yuri, and then you happen to pick up a second Latov later, you can always use Lulu to blow him up and then put another copy of like Latov or whatever backup down that you need. So this card is actually very solid. As a turn 1 play, it's like dependable and it's not going to like dick you over. But then like later on, it becomes a very solid card as well. Deals 7k damage, which is like straight up there's like now value, and then also clears the backup out, which means that it gives you like utility in the future as well. And it happens to be Guardian, which means that if you want to build the Guardian deck, then it's a great card for that as well. So it ticks a lot of boxes, and I like this card very much. Guardian is definitely one of those decks I'm going to experiment around with, especially in the early couple of weeks. And as soon as I sort of like really fine tune my fire water build, I will show you guys how cool the new Guardians can be. And the final card of the fire element is Rain. She's a free CP 6k forward, so it's a little bit below the curve. But EX burst, when Rain enters the field, you may search for one category WAF monster and add it to your hand. Category WAF monsters you control gain plus 1,000 power. So obviously this card is built to support the new monster forward hybrids that we got from this set, which would be in this case Frit, Zapped, and Babblers, right? So if you do take into consideration that you are getting one of those cards for free, then this becomes a 1 CP 6k forward, which actually is pretty solid value, right? 1 CP for 6k is pretty solid, and also gives those WOF monsters plus 1k, pushing them all from the 4k mark to 5k mark. That being said though, you'd like, even though you're paying a very nominal amount, you're still paying a very nominal amount for junk cards. So Rain is like still a 1 CP 6k, which isn't really getting over anything. Maybe you might trade against stuff, and your WOF monsters are all 5ks, right? So the only cards that they're beating in combat are the other small cards that your opponents are playing, such as like Vikings and like Fermentosis, cards that aren't supposed to be in combat. So the buff to your monsters like isn't particularly strong. Your monster's still going to get run over in most fights, right? It just means that your monsters will hit a little bit harder, so you don't need as big a following burn spell to then blow your opponent's dudes up, right? So this card is like pretty cost effective, but you're probably going to need at least a second element in order to make this Rain work. So because the only WOF monsters that are currently out at the moment are those free monster forward hybrids, there's not a lot of targets, and you're required to like play a secondary element, right? Now it looks like at this stage it's much more likely going to be the fire and lightning combination as opposed to fire and ice combination. So while Babblers searches for Shivas, which is very good, the fact that like the best Shiva, or like arguably one of the best Shivas, is the Shiva that deals damage equal to 6,000 plus the number of Shivas in your break zone, right? So in that sort of situation, you want to just make pretty much all your summons Shivas, right? So in that situation, you don't need these other summons. So Babblers tends to lend itself more towards a mono ice build, which means that if you were going to play a secondary color with Rain, it's probably going to be like the fire and lightning, which means you get access to Zapped, which is actually a pretty solid card that I searched for in the form of Ramu. So you can play Rain and Zapped, and then you can maybe have some shenanigans with Phoenix or whatever. Which actually, now that I think about it, it's not too bad, considering they're both 2 CP forward / monsters, which means you can bring it back with Phoenix, and because Phoenix is going to be hitting for 2 or 3k, depending whether you have Say Tuna or not, it means that your monsters can then trade up against like 6 or 7ks. So if you have this Rain on the field, you run like your Zapped or run your Frit into their guys, you deal them 5k damage, you play a Phoenix, which then spreads another 2k to all their guys, 2k to their guys. You bring another Zapped or a Frit onto the field, and because your Frit or Zapped originally died, you get to search your deck for an Ifrit or a Ramu. Actually, now that I put it that way, it's less bad than I originally thought it would be. So it's a cute gimmick. Not sure if you can build an entire deck around this cute gimmick, but yeah, it definitely seems like a buildable gimmick. It's not one of those gimmicks where you can't build a deck around it at all. It definitely feels like a gimmick that you can potentially build a gimmick around. So this card seems like a fun card. But in my opinion right now, if you are looking for something competitive straight away, I would definitely go for a new Legendary Land. And obviously, if you're playing a new Legendary Land, you're going to be playing Classic Rain to support him. But if you want to play this like monster shenanigans with Phoenix, then be my guest. It actually works well because Fire also happens to have like Hoyin, which is a 2 CP monster, a 2 CP forward that gets really big if you have more WOF cards in the field. So that's another cool build around or like direction to take that deck with it as well. So this card, not a bad card. Potential to play it into a fun meme deck. So maybe if I build a fun meme deck to show you guys, maybe we'll build one around Rain and show you guys what this card can do.
So guys, what do you think? Were there any cards that are overrated or underrated? What cards do you think that I might have missed something out on, or what cards do you think that I might have judged a little bit too harshly? Do let me know your thoughts and opinions in the description below. If you have any cool ideas, do feel free to share them as well. I do love hearing feedback from you guys. If you guys enjoyed this video, please feel free to like and subscribe. I'll be putting out a whole much more content about the Final Fantasy TCG in the near future. I hope you guys enjoyed. Until next time, Grand J out.